Hello, welcome back. It's Jorbs. I've been talking about my world record runs at the end of 2020 and beginning of 2021. There are 5 streaks to look at, and we've looked at the 8 streak with Ironclad, the 9 streak with Silent, and now I'm going to look at the 10 streak with Defect. I actually didn't look through these runs before recording this. Like, these videos are taking a lot longer than I thought they would, so I just want to sort of get them done. But I hope you'll be here with me to chat about Defect. Defect's maybe my favorite character right now. I think Defect is plausibly the second strongest character in Slay the Spire on patch 2.2. Probably the third strongest, but plausibly the second strongest. Defect is definitely very powerful. And I think I've always been quite a good Defect player. I've always understood... I'm like very innately drawn to scaling a deck in a sort of control-y type of way, and that's what Defect often tries to do. But throughout most of my career playing Defect, I would also like try to do fun things with All for One and try to set up crazy infinites and stuff like that fairly often. Partially because it was fun and partially because I believed it was the right way to win runs fairly often. And back in the beginnings of 2020, I think, I'm pretty sure, maybe late 2019, Crimson Blur, who had watched me play a ton of Spire and then started playing Slay the Spire at Ascension 20 himself and doing very well. He was the first player to win 10 runs rotating. And I'm pretty sure he got a 10 streak with Defect as well. If it was less than that, I apologize for the inaccuracy, but the general vibe is that he was playing Defect very, very well. And I looked at how he was playing a couple of times, and it was like, oh, he's like doing very similar things to what I do when I scale my orbs and stuff, which makes sense because he's watched a ton of my channel, so he understands how I value those cards and everything. And then as I watched him a little bit more, I realized, oh, he's not doing all the other stuff. He's like just very deliberately focusing on this strong thing that Defect can do, and even going very hard into making turn 1 and 2 very strong with relics and cards like Cool-Headed and stuff like that in order to enable that scaling to come online faster. And so I thought, okay, that's cool. I understand how that works. I can do that, sure. I had already, leading up to that, been like slowly getting less and less enchanted with All for One type things. And I sat down at some point and did the math on exactly how likely was I to find different scaling cards from hallway fights or elite fights or at stores, how many relics were there to go into this and stuff like this. And over the last like 8 months or so, I would say my Defect play has changed a fairly large amount, but not in a way that I couldn't have done before 8 months ago. I just sort of stopped doing the things I think are bad. I didn't realize that they were bad yet, and I just stopped doing them. And instead I focus very hard on basically hunting for focus every Defect run and putting together focus scaling for the late game boss gauntlet. And I've found that Defect is usually strong enough to get through Act 1 and 2 with like 1 Doom and Gloom. Defect just does not need very much in the way of damage added to its deck at the start of the run. I've been boss relic swapping sometimes with Defect. I've also chosen not to boss relic swap with Defect a decent amount. I think that Defect's boss relic swapping is probably the most well-balanced of all of the characters right now, where it is often good to and often not good to. The big defining factor is whether you have a lot of ways to get value out of your lightning orb in Act 1, usually. So if you're looking at an Act 1 with 3 elites ahead of you, that Lightning Orb can be quite valuable, especially if you've got a different whale bonus that makes you stronger for the elite fights. Whereas if you're looking at an Act 1 that's like 3 campfires and 2 elites, Lightning Orb isn't nearly as exciting, and trading Boss Relic on Defect, it's Runic Pyramid for you. Hitting Energy as Defect is really nice because Defect has so many excellent cards that draw cards. And yeah, just in general, it feels like Defect can win off any Boss Relic swap, which isn't as true for other characters, in my opinion. Choker is fine for Defect because you only have to play 6 cards a turn to get your scaling working. Playing on 3 energy is fine. 4 energy can pretty much always be useful with cards like Cool-Headed. Cards like Meteor Strike. Meteor Strike is actually a very significant part of why Boss Relic swapping is good on Defect. Not just when you hit Snecko Eye. When you hit 4 energy in Act 1, you can start taking Meteor Strike, and Meteor Strike unlocks some really strong acceleration for your decks. My Meteor Strike decks tend usually to still want to scale with Frost Orbs later on in fights, but you can be throwing in some Meteor Strikes alongside and just doing a lot more with your turns. So anyway, yeah, I have of course gotten distracted, and in an attempt to not take as long making this video, I have gone on a tremendous tangent, but I was pretty chill in August of 2020, I would say, in terms of Spire. These are only Defect runs, but it looks like I played like 15 of them total in August, which means I probably played like 60 runs total across all the characters. Actually, I probably wasn't playing Watcher at the time, so it's probably more like 40 runs. You can see how little I played at the end of 2020, like in total probably somewhere in the vicinity of 100 runs in the last 4 months of this year, and then compare that to January, where I played a billion runs. But yeah, because I was so chill and just like having a good time playing when I was feeling up to it, not pushing myself too hard, I was doing very, very, very well in terms of win rate during August. And this streak is one of the things that came of that. This is also, it's slightly before when I had my Ironclad win streak. So I had a Defect world record and an Ironclad world record, both at around this time. Let's just take a look at the runs, and I'll try to talk through what's going on. I actually think Defect is, like 90% of the time, the way that I win the run is just really pretty straightforward and doesn't feel like it should be that hard to explain to someone. You just like add a little bit of damage, and then you add lots of block and card draw and acceleration in the form of like turbos and stuff, and all of the orb scaling you can get until you have enough orb scaling to win. And that's essentially what you do. It's a very straightforward formula. Defect is, I would say, the most linear of any of the characters for me, and the most consistently linear in the same way of all of the characters for me. But it seems to be working, and it's actually quite rewarding and enjoyable for me to play still, because the ways in which I manage to get through like Act 2 elite fights with very few damage cards are often very interesting and stuff like that. So, cool. I think that's all I want to say right now. Oh, I will mention, like, the other 10% of runs with Defect go absolutely, completely off the rails. They are, like, the most unique runs that I have in Slay the Spire on any character. Just stuff is, like, completely insane. You're holding on for dear life in those runs. I remember, in particular, a run somewhat recently where I had 3 Hyper Beams and 3 Meteor Strikes without Snecko Eye, and I survived one of the Act 2 Elite fights because Strike Dummy gave Meteor Strike 3 more damage, and without that I would have been attacked for lethal. So, you know, there's the normal stuff, and there's the what is going on stuff. And that's the joy of Defect, because sometimes you really get pushed into other things because your relics are so strongly pushing you there. And when you follow those very strong relics into other things, you get rewarded with a lot of strength, but also you're doing something completely off the wall and you a lot of the time. So anyway, Floor 1, Jawworm, Rip and Tear over Compile Driver, and Go for the Eyes. Rip and Tear, this is like, you want the cards that deal good damage. And Rip and Tear deals 14 damage. This is a card that kills Gremlin Knob, kills Lagavulin. That's what it does for you, that's what you need to do right now. In general, Compile Driver is a card that can be strong all the way through late game. Go for the Eyes is a really interesting defect card because often your defect decks will not be able to deal with artifact charges late game, which means that it just doesn't do anything. And also because defect decks are so much about drawing the cards that scale them, that adding a card that might not do anything really slows you down and has some cost. So, you know, Go for the Eyes, sometimes an okay card for sure, but that's what I'm often thinking about Go for the Eyes. I really want, like, Defect wants a card like Skewer or Whirlwind right now. Defect wants to be able to put all of its energy into damage to kill Act 1 elites and also Act 2 elites eventually, without having to dedicate too many cards in order to actually do that, so that instead you can transfer into having the majority of your deck be about drawing your scaling and blocking while you do so, because that's going to be how you win every fight after the middle of Act 2. Pretty much, except for maybe Reptimancer. Although, honestly, Defect is so good at scaling that often you beat Reptimancer that way too, just fine. So, anyway, Rip and Tear, most damage per card, basic idea. Floor 2, we beat some small slimes, we take Cold Snap. Cold Snap is great. Cold Snap is a playable late game card. The Frost Orb scales. So, usually your attack commons are not cards which are going to get stronger as the run goes on. That would be the norm, I would say, for attack commons. But Cold Snap is a card that manages to break from that rule, just because if you're in a situation with 8 focus, channeling Frost Orb is incredibly, incredibly good. And you're very likely to be in a situation with 8 focus at the end of a run with Defect, unless you're choosing not to pick your focus cards when they're offered, which I would not recommend. So, Cold Snap, very lovely card to be picking up early. We didn't take the Serpent, we, I think, didn't get anything from Match and Keep, I'm not sure if it would tell me. And I took Charge Battery on floor 5 over Cool Headed and Turbo. Turbo is definitely a card that does very well in Defect. I usually don't start taking Turbos until Act 2, although I'm not going to say that I've never taken a Turbo in Act 1 by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, this, like, the Void is largely not relevant, because your deck scales so much the first time through it that by the time you're in your second draw pile, you almost don't need your cards to do anything a lot of the time as Defect. You'll be passively creating 60 plus block every turn by that point, most likely. So it doesn't really matter that you're putting a Void in your discard pile. By the time you get to it, you're going to have the fight under control against almost all enemies. This card's just giving you bonus energy to take advantage of your, like, Cool-Headed pluses, drawing you a ton of cards, which Cool-Headed is an excellent card draw card, which is available at common. Compile Driver is also an excellent card for card draw, which is, again, available at common. Defect has a lot of very good card draw available. I didn't even mention Skim yet, or, like, Fission, for that matter. So, with all that said, didn't take Turbo. I did not take Cool-Headed either. Cool-Headed's a card that is going to be very strong almost always by the end of a run on Defect. In fact, I would say that one of the primary objectives of the way that I am playing Defect here is to make sure that Cool-Headed is strong at the end of a run, because it's a common that has the ability to block against Act 4 enemies. So when you have that in your card pool, you would really like it to be a strong card by the time you get to the end of a run. On top of that, it draws cards while it's doing that blocking, so that's pretty rad. That said, Cool-Headed isn't a super great card yet. I already have a Frost Orb from Cold Snap, so I don't have to take it out of fear that I will never see a Frost Orb or anything like that. And so I'm just taking Charge Battery. Charge Battery is a nice card. Again, Defect has access to lots of card draw. Defect doesn't always get a 4th energy from the Act 1 boss, and so being able to play a block card, which is you very, very often are happy to play a block card on your turn, and have more energy the next turn is just lovely. It's very valuable. It plays really nicely with Echo Form. Playing Charge Battery as your doubled card with Echo Form is often very powerful because it sets you up for a very large turn next turn. And it only blocks for 7, but at this point in the run, that's enough to be very significant. I generally am quite happy to take a dedicated block card early on in Act 1 on Defect, which is not necessarily the case with the other characters, I wouldn't say. Silent feels like she often really has to work hard to add damage to her deck. Ironclad feels like he is so far leaning into damage, especially with Bash applying Vulnerable, that you want to keep doubling down on that. Although I'm still like taking Flame Barrier if Flame Barrier is offered. But sometimes I might not take a Shrug It Off over like a decent attack common. Defect, especially when you already have your Lightning Orb, and if you have like one Ball Lightning or one Doom and Gloom, Defect has very, very high value attacks available early on in the run. You're already at a point where you're dealing a ton of damage, especially coupled with Dual Cast to make that Lightning Orb deal 16 in one turn, and so you can afford to have one block card. And Defect actually has very low block density in his starting deck. Defect has the same block starting density as Ironclad without having a 6 health sustain every fight that Ironclad has from Ironclad's starting relic. So you do need some block as Defect early on a lot of the time. We go into the Sentries fight. Sentries are typically a pretty good fight for us. Actually, Sentries and Lagavulin are both pretty good fights for us. Lagavulin doesn't debuff your focus, so your orbs remain strong all the way through the fight. And Sentries, the fight tends to drag on, which means your orbs have lots of time to generate passive value for you. And we pick up an Orichalcum. It's interesting that I skipped Fusion. Wait, is Fusion the bad one? Fusion is the bad one, right? And Fission's the good one? I always get them confused, and usually I have the picture available to me. Yeah, Fusion's the one that channels a Plasma Orb. Okay, well that makes sense. It's not Fission. I would definitely have been taking Fission there. But Fusion we can skip. Just a slow card. Stack, not quite good yet, although Stack is often premium block later on in runs. And Defect is a character who's pretty happy to have block while setting up, so having a couple of stack pluses once your deck is 30 plus cards can be very, very, very valuable. I also skipped Streamline. I'm allowed to take Streamline here. I don't know what my whale bonus was. I have a Rip and Tear and a Cold Snap, so I'm probably just barely good, but it's not that bad to take Streamline. It's a very bad card, but at least it deals 15 damage, and sometimes early on in runs you do need the ability to deal lots of damage, so not a card that's going to be very good later on in the run, but maybe okay to take there. Managed to only take 23 damage from Gremlin Knob, which is actually pretty good. Orichalcum and a Frost Orb help a lot there, probably. And we got a Singing Bowl early, which is great, and a Ball Lightning, which is even better. Ball Lightning is one of the best commons in the game. This just deals a lot of damage for 1 energy as a common. This is one of the reasons that Defect is so powerful early on, and also a large reason why Defect is able to so happily focus on late game builds that have very few attacks in them, because Defect can leverage just 1 or 2 attack cards to deal a tremendous amount of damage and solve the early to mid-run problems, demand damage of you with very little investment, leaving a lot of card picks and deck space for, you know, all the other things that you might want to do. So picking up a Ball Lightning is great, never taking Blizzard or Steam Barrier over this card, never skipping it either. We got a Dreamcatcher, we skipped Melter, Machine Learning, and Claw. There's like maybe a slight argument for Machine Learning here. It's a very slow card, and I'd rather play a Cool-Headed Plus, which is, you know, a common that should be available later on in the run. Machine Learning tends to go in decks that are really struggling to find acceleration, but Defect is a character who doesn't tend to struggle very much to find that acceleration, so usually taking a pass on Machine Learning. with Defect unless I have particular reasons for it to be good, like a Mummified Hand, a Bird Face Turn, stuff like that. Melter would be more damage, but I already feel like we have enough damage for pretty much everything in the run here. We'll probably add one more premium damage card like a Doom and Gloom or an Electrodynamics and pretty much call that good. There's also always compile drivers we can add that draw cards. It looks like eventually we got a Barrage in this run, which is actually a very premium damage common. So, Defect's got lots of ways to deal lots of damage with very few cards. Floor 11, we just take another +2 max HP. I think that taking Recycle here is like plausible, but we probably don't have enough card draw for it. And that would only be if I wasn't getting +2 max HP when I skipped on Singing Bowl. With the +2 max HP, that's actually pretty significant. Anytime you have a run of Slay the Spire where your character is able to set up into something strong enough to beat anything in the game, which can happen on any of the characters, but in particular on Defect will happen very often with the availability of orb scaling. Having max HP to keep you alive while you do it is a nice fail-safe. It's not something you want to rely on in every fight, but like against the heart, yeah, it's nice to have at least 60 HP going into that fight, for example. Fought Lagavulin, took 6 damage, get a Maw Bank. I did not take Meteor Strike. Didn't take Heat Sinks either, which makes sense. I don't have any powers yet, I don't think. And I didn't take Steam Barrier, which is, you know, okay. Steam Barrier is an alright block card if you happen to have an all-for-one, which I don't really recommend for what it's worth, or if you have a lot of card draw and not a lot of energy. But it just gets outshone by like Glacier, Cool-Headed, Stack even, Genetic Algorithm. There are a lot of Defect block cards that block for a lot more than Steam Barrier does. I even generally prefer to have a Charge Battery than a Steam Barrier. Even though I don't get the energy until next turn, the Charge Battery blocks for a little bit more and also allows me to like put together combo turns where I set up to take advantage of 5 energy or something like that. If I had Boss Relic swapped and I had 4 energy right now, I'm 100% taking this Meteor Strike for what it's worth. The upside on the card is tremendous. If you can like ever play it, it is really good. Like if I had an energy potion only, even with the deck otherwise how it is, I might consider taking Meteor Strike here. I think that this card is... it's a very unique card. It's very hard to evaluate how strong it is, and it happens to be very, very strong, but it's hard to understand how to leverage it, and I think that very, 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 very few players are anywhere near understanding how many things you can do with that card. There are definitely runs on Defect that you only win because you take Meteor Strike, like none of the other things that are available to you are winning them. It's a card that becomes good if we get a 4th energy. We already have the Charge Battery. Becomes good if we get a Snecko Eye. It becomes good with Runic Pyramid very easily. There's lots of ways for this card to become very, very powerful. Lab gave us Distilled Chaos and Swift Potion. Sure, why not? We fight Swarm of Slimes and take Barrage over Darkness. Both of these cards are good damage cards. Darkness is a little bit less appealing when we don't have a compile driver yet, and when we aren't channeling that many orbs, because it's going to be hard to channel it. It's weird, because Barrage seems like it would care about channeling lots of orbs too, right? But Barrage primarily cares about getting 3 orbs into play, which I can do. I can play my Ball Lightning, my Zap, my Cold Snap, and I start with 1 at the start. So I channel 4 orbs in my first trip through my deck, which means that Barrage is online and dealing 12 for 1 already, which is great. And then Barrage continues to scale over the course of a run as you get more orb slots. Barrage can be pretty easily hitting for 40 plus damage when you play it, which is enough to be a relevant card even in late game fights. Like there are even heart fights that you play where Barrage is your go-to for damage. Defect just has a lot of commons that are very good at scaling for later on in the game. So, that's cool. Also got a Fear Potion, it looks like. I guess I must have discarded something. Or maybe I used a potion to survive this fight, who knows. Immediately upgraded Barrage to go into our boss fight, and yeah, Barrage is just hitting for 18 for 1 energy right now, which is pretty good. Kill the Guardian and get an Electrodynamics over 2 mediocre cards, I'll say. Buffer's pretty surprisingly good, actually. It does pretty well in Act 2 in particular, it feels like, and Act 3, and maybe also Act 4. It's just like a pretty good card, Buffer. But it's definitely not Electrodynamics. Electrodynamics is super premium. It is sort of the gold standard of dealing tons of damage with little investment. It scales with all of the cards that Defect wants to be playing, pretty much. Dual Cast is great with it. Anything that gains you focus is great with it. Ball Lightning is great with it. It's just a tremendously good card, even if you didn't have other things to support it, and when you have literally any Defect card, it gets better, pretty much. And we also open up Pandora's box. Unfortunately, this is a run played before I had the relic extension tracking what relics did, so I don't know exactly what was in this Pandora's box. But I'm gonna guess from looking at the deck that it was relatively good Defect cards, which is unsurprising because almost all of them are pretty good. Looking at this deck, there are not many bad cards in this deck. So we probably hit like a Compile Driver, a Go for the Eyes, maybe even 2. I don't know, maybe there's Bias Cognitions from it, maybe a Defragments from it. We'll find out because we'll see that we pick them up later. It's a little bit harder to comment on the run now because I don't know what's in my deck anymore. But picking up a loop is like, I would say that your priority list for orb scaling powers is roughly Defragment, then Capacitor, then Loop, in terms of your uncommons at least. Capacitor and Defragment are very close in power. I see lots of people trying to like use spreadsheets to work out how much focus do you need for a loop to be worth more than an orb slot or something like that. And none of them do a particularly good job of recognizing how orbs interact with other things. Like, very rarely do people consider that you evoke orbs a lot, right? And when you evoke orbs, they benefit from having more focus, but they don't benefit from you having a loop in play. So that's one reason that Defragment's better than Loop, is that if you evoke 6 orbs in one turn, all of them benefit from focus, and Loop didn't do anything. Another thing to consider is that there are cards like Compile Driver in the game. There are cards like Barrage in the game. And so having access to more orb slots lets you scale up these commons, which are pretty good to have early on in the game and can be strong enough to survive late game with as well. Because all of a sudden Compile Driver is drawing you 3 or 4 cards, and Barrage is dealing you 36 plus damage or whatever. And Loop doesn't interact with that stuff either. So Loop is certainly powerful. Generally speaking, you're trying to reach a point where you outscale the Act 3 and 4 boss gauntlet, and Loop is going to function multiplicatively with your other things in order to help you do that. It scales off of focus, for example, so as you get more focus, your Loop gets better. But I would say that it is probably the least exciting of all of the things that I've just mentioned. It's probably the only one of the orb scaling uncommon powers that I'm not immediately taking if I see it in Act 1. The only other thing I guess to mention about Loop is that it's actually really nice to start your turn with block in the heart fight. And that'll win you some heart fights that you would have lost otherwise, because when your Loop goes off and hits a Frost Orb, all of a sudden you have 8 block, you get to play a few cards without the Beat of Death dealing damage to you. And if you're at 1 HP, and you have like 8 cards in your hand that you want to play, that's a really big deal. You might just be able to end your turn, and then your orbs will go off and make you 60 block, and maybe you survive the incoming attack. But unless you have Loop in play, it's often difficult to begin your turn by playing a card, especially when you consider that often you'll have Echo Form in play. And so, while one answer would be to just begin the turn with a block card every turn, One, you don't always have a block card in your hand at the start of every turn, so that doesn't always matter, doesn't always work. And two, that's costing you the ability to play Echo Form on, say, a Defragment. You don't get to Echo Form Defragment if you instead Echo Form Defend. So Loop can be really powerful for that exact situation. I wouldn't say that I am picking Loop at the beginning of Act 2 because I care so much about that situation, but I would absolutely say that as I'm evaluating whether I'm going to win the heart fight or not, I'm thinking heavily about whether I'm going to be taking 6 damage at the start of every turn from the Beat of Death or not, which is largely based on whether I have Loop or not. Loop plus how much block card density I have, plus whether I have Echo Form, stuff like that. Go to a store, purchase Defragment and Calipers. Calipers is... I don't think I've talked about Calipers in any of these World Record Streak videos yet. Calipers can be a bit of a meme. My chat certainly likes to say Calipers would be good here anytime that we end the turn with more than 15 block, which is usually that happens once a run at least by the time you get to Act 3. Often when your deck is completely overwhelmingly powerful and there's no possible way you could lose, right? So Calipers would be good here. Sure, we've already clearly automatically won the run, but I mean sure, it would save us 3 block, sort of thing. Calipers notably doesn't do anything unless you're able to overblock by 15 on your turn. So there are lots of situations where Calipers is just abjectly terrible. For example, all of Act 1 every single time, pretty much. And usually most of Act 2 at least as well. Defect, however, can very, very, very much like Calipers because of how Frost Orbs work. Frost Orbs are going to make you block whether you're under attack or not. And so against enemies who don't attack you every turn, like Time Eater or the Heart, Calipers is really, really nice to be able to hold on to block between turns. It gives you a lot of block output in those sorts of fights. So it's a very powerful Defect relic. I am going to guess that I had some decent Frost Orb generation and perhaps some focus at this point in the run off my Pandora's box. I don't know exactly what Pandora's box was, but it looks like with Loop and Calipers, I'm already thinking, okay, I have the ability to Frost Orb block scale at the end of the run. If I didn't have that stuff going on yet, I might actually buy Calipers anyway, because I'm still expecting to win the run that way. I just haven't gotten the cards for it yet. That's the level to which I am sort of all in on this type of scaling for late game Defect right now in my career as a Slay the Spire player. And I mean, it's been working for me, so it's not abstractly the way that I enjoy playing Slay the Spire. I like being flexible and thinking about what's the right solution for this situation. But Defect is still very enjoyable for me to play because Defect's unique orb mechanic is actually just very fun and satisfying to interact with, I've tended to find. So I always feel pretty comfy building toward it, and also it just tends to work almost all of the time, which is pretty nice. So there's that. We take the defragment, we duplicate the defragment, so if we didn't have focus before, we certainly do now. I took another Darkness Plus. Oh no, this is my first Darkness Plus, which I'm taking over Hologram and Rebound without knowing what cards are in my deck. I mean, that's fine, I guess. Darkness Plus is an okay card. Looks like maybe I wanted some damage for the champ fight, which is fine. I mean, Darkness plus any Frost Orbs plus some focus certainly insta-kills the champ, so this is like taking a champ fight that was probably already fine anyway, and making it a 100% easy thing instead of a 99% thing. Maybe like overkill, maybe too much, but you know, the Darkness Orb will be valuable in other places too, probably. We survived the Snake Plant, didn't take Claw, Rebound, or Melter. Those are generally not very exciting cards. Upgraded Defragment, and gave away a Hyper Beam at the Bonfire Spirits. I don't think that was from the Whale, I'm pretty sure that's from Pandora's box. Either way, pretty nice to get a 54 HP heal plus 10 max HP plus a card remove on a card that isn't really that good anymore. Now that I have electrodynamics and double upgraded defragment, the use cases for Hyper Beam are a lot lower than they used to be. Looks like I have a self-repair ticking over from the Pandora's box as well, which is awesome. I haven't really talked about self-repair yet. Maybe I'll talk about it another time when I actually pick it, instead of getting it from Pandora's box. Took a lot of damage from Taskmaster. Sometimes you don't draw electrodynamics early, but still alive, still doing fine. Got another defragment plus from Chosen block here. This is the Chosen plus the Bird Cultist fight, I believe, is what that's called. So I now have 6 focus, which is almost enough to win the run. Skip some stuff for some health. Static Discharge is worth mentioning. It looks like I already have one in my deck, probably. Static Discharge is a very powerful card. It's a card sort of like Meteor Strike, where the things that it does are not immediately obvious. And so it's easy to not quite register how powerful this card is. The thing is, there are a lot of multi-attacks in the game, and if you have Frost Orbs channeled, they'll passively generate block at the end of your turn, and then when you get attacked by multi-attacks, the first time that one gets through your block, you're going to channel 2 Lightning, which evokes 2 Frost Orbs, and all of a sudden you're basically doubling up your block from Frost Orbs that turn. So Static Discharge is somewhat frequently, I won't say incredibly frequently, maybe like 10 to 20% of the time, Static Discharge is a very important resource in the Heart fight, because the Heart has a times 15 attack, which attacks for more than any of its other attacks, with the exclusion of like turn 2 and 3. In general, you're talking about like 90 or 120 or just 60 maybe incoming damage from the multi-attack, whereas the non-multi-attack hits you for like 50 once. So that's not as big of a deal that turn. So Static Discharge can get you through the turn where you're getting attacked for 120 without your deck needing to be anywhere near as good. And then all you have to do is rechannel Frost Orbs. It's also, of course, dealing like 200 damage to the Heart potentially at the same time, which is a nice added bonus. The card's pretty good at killing like Book of Stabbing or even Slavers or Gremlin Leader. Any fight where you get attacked more than once in a turn, Static Discharge is dealing tons of damage, and even fights where you only get attacked once in a turn, if you can underblock by 1, which isn't that hard to do on a character with so much access to like Bullheaded and Charge Battery and Steam Barrier and cards like this, all of a sudden you're able to deal quite a lot of damage with this. So this is a very, very powerful card. I have had new players express that it seems like a bad card because if you're playing well, you shouldn't be taking damage. And that's one of the most significant misconceptions, I think, in approaching high difficulty Slay the Spire that you can have. Your health in high difficulty Slay the Spire is absolutely a resource that you are meant to use aggressively in order to make your deck stronger, which means that if you can fight an elite fight and take 20 damage and get a relic, you absolutely want to be doing that. And if you can take a card like Static Discharge and take a couple of damage in holy fights to avoid taking 10 damage in holy fights because they take 3 turns longer, that's also obviously going to be good. So, Static Discharge, we ended up skipping it there, I think because we already had one probably, but definitely worth mentioning. I got a Gambling Chip off Book of Stabbing. Also took 47 damage in this fight, which seems like a lot, honestly. This deck doesn't seem like it should take 47 damage at this point, but I guess it did. We got lots of HP though, and Campfire coming up, so it's okay. I skipped Recycle again. I guess I probably still don't have enough card draw for it. I don't know. I don't have that much energy, and Recycle can be used to create energy. But I don't have any card draw on my relics, and I don't really have a lot of card draw on my cards, I don't think. So I guess it makes sense. Recycle's a card that definitely gets way stronger if you have a deck that's drawing lots of cards. And if you do have a deck that's drawing lots of cards, sometimes Recycle will let you win with some sort of infinite at the end of the run. My general experience with Defect is that you don't usually need to. Usually you can just win some other way, but you know, sometimes it happens, and it's a nice option to have available to you, especially if the card that you're taking to enable it later just isn't that bad of a card the rest of the time. Like the fact that Recycle can make you some energy and get rid of a card that you don't want is pretty valuable. Even without considering that it also might be able to let you recycle your deck down to some sort of infinite combo at the end of the run. You rest and take a hologram. Hologram's fine. Hologram tends to get better and better as the run goes on. Hologram's almost like Exhume for Ironclad and power level. It's not really the same, but you can compare it a little bit to Exhume, where like Hologram's almost always going to end up being good in your Defect deck, unless you have a very, very, very power-centric Defect deck that doesn't have many good cards. But usually Hologram will end up being good by the end of the run in your Defect deck. It just isn't that good on like halfway through Act 1. We have defeated the champ, taking 6 damage, unsurprising, and we take Bias Cognition. Bias Cognition, actually another card that people have large misconceptions of when looking at Defect for the first time. So I think probably the safest way to analyze this card so you don't make any mistakes is just ignore the part where it says at the start of your turn, lose 1 focus. It feels like a lot of people get hung up and confused by that. You can pretty much just ignore that that exists. If you're playing Defect close to correctly, Bias Cognition is going to give you enough of a boost that the fight will be over before that drawback becomes a huge problem. On top of that, like there are some fights that drag on a long time. Time Meter fight, Awakened One fight, Heart fight perhaps, and where this losing 1 focus every turn can become a problem. But any artifact charge blocks that debuff from applying, so you won't be losing focus at all. Core Surge, Panacea, Clockwork Souvenir, Artifact Potion. You can also cleanse it with orange pellets. Defect's store relics are incredibly good. One of the reasons is that orange pellets works very nicely with Bias Cognition. Also just Defect's character-specific store relic. The one that gives 3 additional orb slots is crazy strong. The one that... Is that a store relic? I don't think that one's a store relic. But anyway, the one that... What's it called? Like, something capacitor. Runic capacitor, maybe? That relic's really good. Having 3 additional orb slots is really good. And on top of that, Orange Pallette's very good with Defect. Frozen Eye, very good with Defect. Clockwork Souvenir, very good with Defect. So, one part of winning on Defect is making sure that you're going to stores with enough gold to afford your shop-only relic. Make sure that you have 175 gold going into a store with Defect, basically, to make sure that you can buy that relic for yourself, because if you are pathing through stores with less gold than that regularly, you're wasting a chance to get a relic that breaks the run completely wide open for you. This is a bigger deal on Defect than it is on other characters. Alright, so anyway, we take our Bias Cognition, we take a Velvet Choker, which is fine. Velvet Choker, there are Defect decks that don't want Velvet Choker. If you happen to be playing an all-for-one deck, you definitely don't want this relic, although I think just maybe try to avoid doing that in general. Also, like decks with Fission Plus often get hurt pretty badly by Velvet Choker. There are some decks with Seek Chains, like a bottled Seek Plus into a Seek Plus into a Turbo Echo form, stuff like that on turn 1, where their turn 1 is so strong that they don't want Velvet Choker. But most of the time, you can get away with winning off 6 cards a turn as Defect, just because your cards have so much leverage. A card like Defragment Plus does so much for the rest of the fight once you play it, that you don't need to be playing more than 6 cards a turn. So generally pretty happy with Velvet Choker. It informs us that we want our deck to avoid card spam going forward, so we're not going to like take a Finesse and a Flash of Steel or anything, but yeah, pretty happy with it. It's sort of glazed over picking up Gambling Chip, but I would say that the most important thing that I maybe haven't made a big deal about yet in Defect runs is making your turn 1 and turn 2 stronger, making it so you draw cards faster on them, making it so that you block to not take a ton of damage on them, making it so you are able to get strong scaling cards into play on them, like Defragments and Echo Forms and Electrodynamics. And Gambling Chip is one of the best relics you can possibly hit to enable you to do that. So picking up Gambling Chip is very, very good. Grabbed a cool-headed, cool. Purchased a membership card, a Panacea, and a Hello World. So we've got the Panacea, an artifact charge for our biased cognition, which is, you know, fine. Yeah, it's fine. Generally, I would recommend trying to get a reliable way to stop your biased cognition debuff. You don't necessarily have to wait until you have Panacea down to play your biased cognition. You can just use Panacea later in the fight to block yourself from losing one focus at some point, which is not an incredible card, but it's better than nothing, at least. Better than it doing no thing at all. Panacea sometimes gets counterfeited if we find orange pellets later or something like that, but as long as your deck is drawing enough cards to be okay with drawing a card that just potentially doesn't do that much, you're okay. Actually, remove hologram at the falling event. Guess I didn't have anything worse to get rid of, especially with a Pandora's box. That makes some sense. I'm not gonna get strikes and defends in there. Got a Compile Driver Plus, which tends to be a pretty good late game card. One reason to be taking a random Darkness, which doesn't seem like it synergizes with things all that well, is like, well, one, it just deals decent damage a lot of the time, and two, all of a sudden your Compile Drivers draw 3, which is excellent. Warped Tongue is pretty late in the run, is nice. We upgrade another one of our scaling powers. This is going to be very commonly what the upgrade pattern looks like. We're just upgrading all of our scaling powers. That's just what we do. Nemesis gave us Dead Branch, which I guess I decided to pick up. I remember talking about Silent. I had a deck with 3 catalysts, and I was like, some people are concerned that Dead Branch is going to clog your deck, but when you have 3 catalysts, you certainly don't have to worry about that because the enemies are all going to be dead before you start your next draw pile anyway. The same sort of thing happens for Defect, like I was saying with Turbo even. By the time we get through our first draw pile, we're going to be impossibly strong a lot of the time, so it just doesn't really matter that much what our second draw pile looks like. Usually you're hoping for your second draw pile to be like lots of copies of Cool Headed and stuff, just really good block cards with a little bit of damage. But a few cards from Dead Branch are not gonna make or break the run, most likely. Certainly not gonna break the run. Maybe they'll give us some extra value that will make it, who knows. Upgraded Bias Cognition, again, just upgrading our orb scaling stuff. Got a Lizard Tail, which is excellent, feeling very safe now. The Maw deals 16 to us, very rude, but not a huge deal. Take another Cool Headed. Cool Headed is fascinating because there just aren't that many cards where they are 1-cost commons and you desperately want to take more and more and more and more of them as the run goes on. I guess like the tendency would be the cards that draw you cards, so like Cut Through Fates, maybe Pommel Strikes or Shrug-It-Offs, Acrobatics and Backflips for Silent. So I guess characters have those. Yeah, I guess the other characters have those too. Get a Potion of Capacity. I'm not sure that I have a capacitor yet, so having a Potion of Capacity is actually sort of a big deal. Often you'll hold a Potion of Capacity specifically for the heart fight in situations where you don't get more orb slots. It can be difficult to find more orb slots. All you have to get them are Inserter, Runic Capacitor, and Capacitor. So, well, and Potion of Capacity. So it's a lot easier to find focus than it is to find orb slots, and given the multiplicative nature of focus and orb slots, and the way that orb slots scale with Barrage and Compile Driver and stuff, you really do want to be able to have more of them for the most challenging of the late game fights. I bought a Static Discharge here, fascinating, and then upgraded it. I have no idea why, but okay. Time Eater's dead, Doom and Deca are dead, not even close to being a problem. I upgraded Cool Headed, finally got a Capacitor. I think maybe what it was is I was looking at the run and feeling like it might be challenging to deal enough damage with so few orb slots. Feeling like it was hard for me to channel tons more Frost Orbs. I have 5 Cool Headeds and a Glacier, although I only had 4 Cool Headeds at that point and a Glacier. just feeling like I needed to be able to deal a ton of damage to the heart somehow, and I had 100 health, so this was a way to guarantee that I was dealing tons of damage to the heart. Yeah, maybe, sort of makes sense. Oh, I didn't have the Glacier yet, so yeah, I actually was pretty low on Frost Orbs there. I guess I was just thinking I can, like, smork the heart using 100 HP plus Lizard Tail, and I don't even have to worry about blocking, maybe. Although I imagine, yeah, I only took 37 damage, so with the addition of the Glacier, the Capacitor, and other cool-headed, it ended up not being a super challenging fight. Okay, that took me 50 minutes, and I just talked through one Defect run. I began this video by talking about how this was taking forever, and I wanted to speed up. This is a problem. This is a problem, everybody. They say that when you want to teach someone something, you find someone who's been doing that thing for like 2 years. Because if they've been doing it for less time than that, they're not expert enough to be able to describe how to do it yet. But if they've been doing it longer than that, everything's like up hidden in their subconscious, and they can't really explain it. Or if they do try to explain it, it like takes a long time, and they have to explain all this complex stuff because everything's connected in their brain. And I'm starting to feel like that with Slay the Spire. I feel like a year ago it was easier for me to just very easily tell someone what I was thinking when I was making a decision, and now there's just slightly too much going on in my brain. So it's really fun to have these moments where I can just unpack stuff for you, because like people will ask me, hey, could you explain why you valued loop so highly in that Act 2 card reward? And I can't speak to them for 50 minutes to tell them. But here we are, I was able to tell you a lot about the general things that I think about playing a Defect run, which is awesome, and now we can maybe speed up a little bit as we go through the other runs. Especially since a lot of the stuff that I just told you is going to be exactly the same in future runs. I actually skipped on floor 1 here, didn't take a rebound. Chose to skip over it. I think that's a little bit interesting. Rebound is a card that I do not almost ever want in my deck. The best use case for Rebound is usually with Equilibrium to basically build your own Runic Pyramid, which can be nice. But the good card there is Equilibrium. Ideally, I'd just have like an Echo form and play Equilibrium twice at the start of the turn and not have to worry about Rebound. Rebound just doesn't deal a ton of damage, and one of the quintessential things that you're trying to do with Defect is draw your powers to put them in play. So putting a card from your hand on top of your deck does not synergize very well with that desire. Unless you're specifically putting like a draw 3 on top of your deck or something, in which case, like, good for you, but one, that's hard to guarantee, and 2, if you're drawing 3 extra cards in your turn, you probably don't want to spend 1 energy on a Rebound. You probably have a lot of cards in your hand that you'd really like to play that don't just deal 9 damage or whatever. So, not a huge fan of Rebound, and I guess I chose to just straight up skip it there. Not a ton of elites in the act, it looks like, so maybe it's reasonable. Fire Potion Barrage. Barrage it's just a premium damage card. It's not incredible on floor 2 when you don't have any extra orb channeling yet, but you can almost guarantee that it's going to be very good by like the end of Act 1 already. Ekabeko, potentially a nice card with nice relic with Barrage sometimes. Probably not going to happen, but you never know. Actually chose to upgrade Barrage at an upgrade floor. Got an early defragment over like everything. Like, yeah, there's a cool headed here. Yeah, I don't have any orbs yet, but you just take defragment. It doesn't matter that much. You can almost think of the first 50 floors as your chance to pick up 3 defragments. That's almost what you're using them for when you're playing Defect, in my opinion. Don't die, pick up every defragment you can find. Go from there. So, we fight Lagavulin, We managed to take 18 damage. I guess we don't have any Frost Orbs yet, but we get a Cold Snap from the fight, so now we have a Frost Orb and a Lightning Orb and 2 Focus. We're in very good shape here. Ink Bottle's a very powerful relic too. Maybe not at its best on Defect, but Defect sometimes plays lots of cards. It's not as strong on Defect as it is on like Silent or Watcher, I'd say. Take a rest, grab a Maw Bank, cool. Exordium Thugs dropped a charge battery for me, which is nice of them. I don't even know what fight Exordium Thugs is. I bet that's like the Blue Slaver, and yeah, no, I really don't know which fight this is. Oh, whatever. Taking charge battery, basically same logic as last time I took charge battery. Skipping charge battery on 411 though. Gremlin Knob hits you really hard as Defect, and you can try very hard to make that not the case, right? Like on other characters, I would typically try really hard to make it so Gremlin Knob didn't hit me for 35 damage. The reason for that on other characters is that the health matters, of course, but also you have to work out how you're killing slavers and Book of Stabbing and stuff next act too. And on other characters, the way you're going to do that is like linearly scale your ability to deal attack damage, usually. Usually the other characters are like, well, I started with Bash, I'm going to upgrade Bash. I started with Strike, I'm going to add Wild Strike to my deck. Then I'm going to upgrade Wild Strike. And you keep doing that to a point where you can beat Book of Stabbing or Slavers. That's cool, that's fine. Watcher actually can keep doing that until she just beats the heart. Watcher gets to be incredibly linear in that way. Defect is not linear like that though. Defect, actually, by the time you're in Act 2 fighting Slavers, you probably already want to be beating them with like Electrodynamics or like Doom and Gloom, and then you dual cast the Dark Orb or something like that. You are already thinking about how can I solve these fights by scaling with orbs. And so trying to over-prepare for Gremlin Knob to not take 35 damage just costs you a lot, because you put like 3 extra cards that you don't really want anymore by the end of the act into your deck. It's very costly for Defect in particular. So, in a lot of runs of Slay the Spire as Defect, I just sort of take 36 from Gremlin Knob and them's the beats. And it ends up usually being okay. Defect can usually deal pretty well with the rest of Act 1, and then transfer comfortably into dealing with Act 2 as well. I was at 25 health and rested, and then I went to this fight, and I saw the number 0, and I was like, did I go to 0 HP? But of course not, I won the run, and also a ton of runs after it, so cool. I took Ball Lightning here over Consume, which I think is actually really close. I imagine I thought about this for a long time. Consume is an awkward card that at first it's like really hard to work out how to use it right. Like, it removes an orb slot from you but gives you 2 focus, so it's not really great unless you have like lots of loops or lots of orb slots, and it's pretty slow. It costs 2 energy. It's certainly not as exciting as like Defragment Plus. Defragment Plus gets you that focus going straight away without taking away your orb slots. So like, for the first year that I played Defect or something, I wasn't really sure exactly when to take Consume and when not to. And then eventually I just realized that you take it every time. You just should take it every time. Pretty much every Defect deck is very happy to have 1 Consume. You're very happy even if you only have 3 orb slots to go to 1 orb slot pretty commonly. If you have like a loop in your deck or like gold-plated cables or something, it does fine. On the other hand, this Ball Lightning is a very powerful card. I do need some decent damage. Ball Lightning scales in lovely ways with all sorts of things, so I understand taking the Ball Lightning there over it for sure. I actually took damage from World of Goop. I guess that's fine. We get to rest, we fight Slime Boss, and do just fine. And take a Bias Cognition over Echo Form and Core Search. So Echo Form is definitely one of the most powerful Defect cards. Bias Cognition is just more immediately better. Echo Form is one of the best cards you could possibly play on turn 1 in the Heart fight. But when you're talking about like slavers in Act 2, you want the biased cognition 100%. So these are 2 cards which are by themselves almost powerful enough to win the entire run, but biased cognition is the one that's good immediately, whereas Echo Form tends not to be good until much later. The situations where Echo Form shines very well early on in the run are where you have genetic algorithms to double play or self-repairs to double play. There are some cards that get a lot of value out of being played twice. Self-repair is a really, really big one because it sort of synergizes with Echo Form. You take damage to put Echo Form in play, but then the ability to double play self-repair later on in the fight makes up for that. But I have none of these things, and Bias Cognition's insanely good, so just happy to take Bias Cognition, and we get a Velvet Choker, which doesn't play super well with Ink Bottle, but it doesn't matter that much. That's fine. We talked about Velvet Choker last time. We should be good. And from here, let's see if anything gets really interesting, but I think it's mostly all the same. Chill's a great card. Sweeping Beam, I haven't talked about Sweeping Beam yet. Sweeping Beam is, it doesn't look like a very good card, right? But this is exactly what you need a common card to be capable of doing as Defect. It just happens to do every single thing that you need. You need to be able to deal with fights where there are like 5 enemies with 14 health, and you need to be able to deal with fights where there are 3 enemies with 40 health, and you need to be able to deal with fights where there are 2 enemies with 60 health, and Sweeping Beam does all of these things, and you need to be able to draw cards, and Sweeping Beam draws a card. Obviously it only draws 1 card, so like if you didn't have the Sweeping Beam in your deck, you would have drawn the card anyway, but you wouldn't have gotten to deal 6 damage to all the enemies. And it's a great upgrade too. It upgrades to 9 damage to all enemies, which is... it's normal for a card to upgrade from 6 to 9 damage, right? But most cards don't deal AoE damage, so getting 3 more AoE damage instead of 3 more single target damage is more valuable. So Sweeping Beam's great. When I was talking about how I like to only take as few attacks as possible in Act 1, sometimes you just don't get super high value attacks, and so you take 3 Sweeping Beams instead, and that's actually sort of fine. They don't get too much in the way later on in the game, and they often manage to get the job done going through Act 2, especially with a little bit of support from relics. Did I take Shame for a relic here? Interesting. Why? Like I don't usually do that. I have Omamori. Why does it say I obtained Shame then? It was obviously blocked actually, but yeah, okay. Weird. Leap Plus over Reinforced Body. Reinforced Body is a very powerful card. I haven't taken it yet, but it's very, very good. Combos with like Echo Form, particularly with Calipers, you can do some very silly things with Reinforced Body. It's a card capable of breaking to a point where you just win the run off it. But for right now, we need a Leap Plus to get us through Act 2, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. And Defect has enough ability to scale that you don't need to take like speculative scaling cards on floor 22. As long as you're taking your defragments and your capacitors and your loops, you're usually going to be just fine. So Leap blocks for 12 for 1, whereas Reinforced Body only blocks for 7 for each energy sunk into it. It's a very significant difference, and Leap is the more valuable card there in a threatening Act 2. Upgrade on Bias Cog, Taskmaster beats us up pretty bad, but we got a Pantograph and a Static Discharge, which is more damage, which is nice. No damage from Snecko, no cards either though. Singing Bowl, Rest, we got Strikes and Defends upgraded, which is awesome. Also, I haven't managed to remove a strike yet. One of the reasons why the deck is getting beaten up. Get a Buffer from Snake Plant, which is a perfectly fine card. Capacitor Plus from Chosen and Cultist, and now we're already at a point where with Biased Cog, Defragment, and Capacitor, we're looking at late game levels of orb scaling. That's sort of all you need, so feeling good about that. Pick up a Runic Capacitor from the store, so now we have access to 9 orb slots in fights, and now we're doing really well. I also bought the Essence of Darkness, which is pretty powerful when you have 9 orb slots. It channels a Dark Orb for every orb slot that you have available, so Dark Orbs all of a sudden, wow. I think I may have ended up using that potion in like the Act 4 lead fight or something, but like that's sort of the level of the strength of the potion. Sometimes you'll buy it because you want it for the Act 4 elite fight, even though you're in Act 2 right now. That's allowed, it turns out. Bought the collector, took some damage, but won okay in the end. Why did I go from... Oh, because I had Pantograph. Yeah, so that's pretty easy. And we got a Core Surge, which combos nicely with our Bias Cognition. So last round we had Panacea for Bias Cognition. This time we have Core Surge for Bias Cognition. This is a pretty common, like, almost mini game in Defect runs, is working out how you're going to block the debuff from Bias Cognition in the fights where you need to. There are also lots of fights where you just don't really need to. Not taking Electrodynamics here. There is a point in all Defect runs that win where Electrodynamics stops being the right card to pick over other things. And sometimes it's actually as early as like toward the end of Act 1. Sometimes you already have a deck that's strong enough that Electrodynamics just isn't better than like another Defragment or something like that. Or even like a Fission. Help you put everything in play. Sometimes your scaling and your acceleration in your deck is powerful enough that the slavers just aren't that scary, and you just don't need Electrodynamics that much. Taking Electrodynamics going into Act 3 gives you a very safe Reptimancer fight usually, or a much safer Reptimancer fight at least. But I can look at my potion belt and see that I have the Darkness potion for that fight, which makes me pretty safe in it anyway. I may not fight it at all. And Electrodynamics isn't going to be that useful in other situations. My deck is just capable of surviving them already. So at some point you have to accept that Electrodynamics feels really good to play, but isn't really necessary anymore. And we got a Runic Pyramid, which is very typically incredibly good for Defect, especially with Genetic Algorithm, especially with Core Surge and Biased Cognition, especially with Buffer, especially with Dual Cast, which is like just, this card always does something cute with Runic Pyramid, it feels like. With Barrage, with our good block cards like Glacier, this relic is just, I mean, one of the best relics in the game for all the characters, and certainly that is the case for Defect too. Alright, going into the final act, we got a Glacier, another Defragment, another Defragment. Way to go us. Upgraded our Defragment, sure. Not buying a Reinforced Body, not taking a Reinforced Body. A little bit surprised by that. Upgraded another Defragment. Recalling early. Recalling early I think is more common in Defect than any of the other characters probably, because Defect really wants upgrades to go on orb scaling cards for late game. And so if you don't have an orb scaling card to upgrade and your health is pretty high, it's sometimes just correct to recall now, so that if you get an orb scaling card that needs an upgrade from a fight or a store moving on, you can upgrade it then. So I got a loop from the next floor, and I'm going to get to upgrade that loop at the campfire. Case in point. Skipping Electrodynamics for +2 max HP, don't need Electrodynamics anymore. Got a Potion Belt as well for Dex Potion, which is nice. Fight Time Eater, 14 damage, Donudeka, 11 damage. These enemies just cannot cope with our orb scaling. Purchased a Clockwork Souvenir, which helps us out against the Hearts turn 2 and 3. One thing this deck doesn't have going on super well is the ability to survive turn 2 and 3 against the Heart. Tori's okay against that. Although notice that Tori prevented 9 damage total in the entire run. So it wasn't incredible at it. But Clockwork Souvenir just does great things, re that, and also if we draw Biased Cog in our opening hand, we can even use the Artifact Charge for Biased Cog and just deal with the vulnerable from the Heart with our 5 extra focus that we get on turn 1. 31 damage from Shield and Spear. Actually sort of surprised I took that much, but keep in mind that I have Pantograph, so probably I was trying to save potions, because I figured that I would just heal against the Heart anyway. And also, as you can see from me taking 5 damage against the Heart, you just can't compete with the level of scaling we have. So, good run, very Defect, very good. This is the first boss relic swap run of the sample. Generally, a boss relic swap means 1, the other whale bonuses weren't very good. 2, looking at the act path, I had fairly wide variety of paths that I could choose. If I have one very difficult path and no other paths available, I'm probably not going to be boss relic swapping because I'm going to need the lightning orb. But if I have one path that has a few elite fights on it, one path that has a few extra campfires on it, now all of a sudden, like if I get a runic pyramid so I'm not super strong early on, but will get strong later, I can avoid elites in Act 1 and probably get away just fine. If I get a relic that makes me stronger at fighting elites in Act 1, I can go fight my elites. In this case, I got Black Star. Defect is somewhat capable of beating elites in Act 1 if you get some decent damage. I'm assuming that I had a campfire available to me if I didn't get the damage help leading into this elite. I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, I get Doom and Gloom on the first floor. Static Discharge Charge Battery, get my block card in, Cool Headed and Chill for a few Frost Orbs. So we're already having plenty of focus, or plenty of orbs going. I skipped Consume here, which is incorrect. I'm just gonna straight up say that's not correct. I guess that 8 months ago I wasn't quite ready to see the light of Consume yet, but yeah, you should just take Consume here. It's actually already a good card anyway, like with Static Discharge. You're going to be able to channel lots of orbs, so you want to be getting the extra bonus on them. Really surprised that I didn't take Consume there. Seems wrong. Lagavulin, 8 damage, got a Lantern and a Dead Branch, and another Doom and Gloom, so we are dooming and glooming here. Getting a deck set up to fight lots of elites here to get lots of value from our Black Star. Torian Blood Vial from the Sentries, 13 damage, not such a big deal. Could have taken Leap. I guess I already had a charge battery, so I felt less inclined toward it. Symbiotic Virus is a very, very, very good defect-only relic. Yeah, this is just an incredibly good relic. One thing that's nice about relic swapping is sometimes actually channeling the lightning orb at the start of the fight is bad for you. And in this case with Symbiotic Virus, the fact that I don't have a lightning orb means that I have a dark orb in front at the start of turn 1. So that actually makes it very easy to dual cast my dark orb, for example. Not always the case, but sometimes the case. A Cool Headed over Sweeping Beam seems fine because we have double Doom and Gloom, so we've got lots of damage. An upgraded Static Discharge, that's fine. Remove a Strike is fine. We've got a Boot Sequence here. Do I have a hologram? Boot Sequence is a really interesting card. Defect generally wants some help on turn 1. Oh, I have a Dead Branch, is why I'm happily taking it. The problem is you want to be able to block on turn 1, but you also want to be able to draw lots of cards from your deck to start playing your powers. And so Boot Sequence does a nice thing for you, but it also slows down your ability to get toward your stuff like Defragment. In this situation, I have Dead Branch, so Boot Sequence also gives me a random card, which is very easily enough to make it a good pick. But often when you're offered Boot Sequence like halfway through Act 1, it's sort of a coin flip when you take it. If you get Bag of Prep, it will become incredible. If you get Anchor, though, it will actually become really bad. So you're not sure what's going to happen exactly. If you get Anchor, sometimes like having a hologram is enough to make it good again, fortunately. White Beast Statue and Courier. Actually skipped Barrage here, so I was feeling pretty comfy with my damage, I guess. And we got a Fission over Core Surge and Amplify. I think this is my first Fission. This card's actually insanely good. This card is one of the reasons, actually, why it's really important to build orbs in Defect, because if you don't have orbs in your Defect deck, this card isn't very good, but if you do, holy moly. Holy moly, the things that this card does if you're able to like quickly channel 6 orbs. It's very, very, very strong. So it's definitely one of the huge payoffs for committing hard to being able to channel orbs early on in a run. And we take Philostone, which is fine. It's made slightly better by Tori. Tori is one of the most overhyped relics in the game, just very, very easily. I got this relic on floor 8, and it prevented 16 damage in the entire run. This is a relic that a lot of my viewers look at and like start talking about how it's a supremely powerful S tier relic when it's available. It prevented 16 damage, and we picked it up on floor 8. That's just not good. That, like, Blood Vial healed for more health than Tori prevented damage. Incidentally, the fact that Blood Vial only healed for 18 after picking it up on floor 8 is pretty insane. This run must have really snowballed out of control. So now we have 4 energy, pretty strong deck. I've removed a couple of strikes at this point. I get a self-repair, which makes us really good at sustaining as well. I actually felt comfortable enough to take damage at Forgotten Altar, which is implying that I'm feeling really good about the run. I feel like that's actually unusual, but we get to rest at the campfire anyway, so I guess that helps. Take another boot sequence, because, you know, Dead Branch and stuff. The one thing that isn't going on yet, really... Oh, I got Apparitions. That's why Blood Vial didn't heal for much, sure. One thing that's going on here is I have not found very much focus scaling. And so perhaps you're thinking, well, yeah, Jorbs, sometimes you won't find focus scaling, so how are you going to win when that happens? Your strategy is clearly reliant on, like, well, for one, I skipped consume earlier, is number 1. 2, I just find to consume later, it's like no big deal. 3, I can get like a focus potion, I can exhaust into focus, like there's a billion ways. Billion ways that I can be completely fine. We even just picked up a kunai and an ornamental fan, so we could maybe transition into some sort of Flash of Steel thing and do fine that way too. Sometimes you end up like blocking with stacks and reinforced bodies if you get a kunai, which can be a ton of fun. Another fission, which is fun. Wait a second, where's my first one go? Upgraded fission. Oh, we didn't get another. We just upgraded the one we had. Got it. Here's my focus potion. I'm taking that and planning to just hold it for the heart fight right now. Like, my deck is strong enough that I'm not being forced to use potions, so I can just take the potions that make my orb scale in order to win the late game stuff. More orb channeling things. We got a Seek off the Bronze Automaton, which we killed pretty handily, took 16. And a Cursed Key, which is, you know, fine. 5 energy now, is nice. Double energy plus, pretty nice card with Dead Branch. I don't imagine I'm going to be taking much damage as we go through these fights. Technically took 17 from Nemesis, but left the fight at 33 out of 36 anyway. At this point I have an Echo form and a self-repair, so I'm healing a lot at the ends of fights. Also picked up a Mummified Hand, which is an incredibly powerful Defect relic. Incredibly powerful anything relic. Got my Consume and upgraded it, got a Capacitor, here we go. And also purchased a Runic Capacitor, so, you know, it just takes a couple of cards and all of a sudden you go from having very little in the way of orb scaling to having enough passive orb generation to just beat the heart without any other thing doing anything. And yeah, 0 damage against the heart. So, this run mostly went off the rails from Dead Branch, I would say. Dead Branch, which we picked up at our first elite fight, for what it's worth. Just gives us a ton of output. On top of that, we have Blackstar giving us tons of relics, and we have enough orb scaling to just guarantee a win at the end. Instance Burner's very, very, very powerful as well. Wait, this is a boss relic swap into Runic Pyramid. First time that I've relic swapped into Runic Pyramid in all of these world record streak runs. Runic Pyramid is an incredibly strong relic to start with. It's an incredibly strong relic to get at the end of Act 1 or Act 2, but when you start with it, you actually get to build your entire deck around the concept that you can have any sort of combination of cards that you want, and all you have to do is wait to draw them, and then you can play them together. So for Defect in particular, a Runic Pyramid deck is often going to have copies of Recycle and Double Energy and X cost cards. Recycle, when it targets an X cost card, exhausts an X cost card, the X cost card costs as much as the energy you have right now. So if you have 5 energy and Recycle Reinforced Body, you get 5 more energy, and then you have 10 energy. And you can double energy it and have 20 energy and then do something ridiculous. For example, I can just plan to do this a lot of the time because I start with a Runic Pyramid. Looks like in this round that didn't quite end up happening, but we still have a tremendously powerful deck. Boot Sequence, really nice when you get to hold it if you don't need it on turn 1. Just in general, this looks very, very powerful. Started with a self-repair, which I think is fine. It's important not to go crazy and think that self-repair does more than it does. Because if your deck is struggling and going to die, self-repair does not do anything until the end of the fight. And actually, that's not even true. Self-repair doesn't do anything until the end of the fight if you win it. If you lose the fight, it doesn't ever do anything, actually. So don't just like assume that self-repair is this like incredible no downside block card or whatever. It has a downside. The downside is that it doesn't do anything until the end of the fight. If you're in a really tough fight where you're scraping the bottom of the barrel for your HP, self-repair is not going to block for you this turn, and you may die. However, especially in patch 2.2, where like every character is just a lot stronger than before, self-repair is an excellent way to take a run that is doing okay and start to snowball it early. It's also a surprisingly good card against the Act 1 elites. Not many block cards are good against the Act 1 elites, but you get to play it before you actually start fighting Lagavulin, so that's good. You often get to play it on a turn against sentries where you don't have anything else that's better to play, because as you go through your deck the second time, you just start drawing tons of dazes. And so you're not going to waste energy on it when you could have used the energy on something else in the sentries fight, because most likely is that you'll only have 2 energy worth of other cards to play anyway. And against Gremlin Knob, it's a card that pseudo blocks for you while not giving Gremlin Knob strength. So it's actually quite good against Act 1 elites. And for me, that's usually like half of why I'm taking self-repair early, is how good it is against the Act 1 elites. And then the fact that it sustains and lets me snowball and does cool things like that later is the other half of the equation. But don't like overvalue that half, I guess, because Defect is very capable of winning runs that are very close through Act 2. Defect runs for me often feel like I'm doing well in Act 1 and then I'm getting as close, it's like flying a plane as close to the ground as you can get and then boom, like flying up again, is how playing Defect feels sometimes. You get really close to dying in Act 2 because you're cutting as much of the stuff for Act 2 out of your strategy as you can, and then boom, your late game synergies come online and you win. That is generally how I'm aiming to play my Defect runs. And so because of that, adding a self-repair to the deck is sometimes a little bit iffy for that Act 2 part. Sometimes a little bit iffy. It can also be really good for the Act 2 part if you have a deck that's good at blocking, if you pick up an Echo Form, stuff like that. I have a lot to say about Defect. Alright. We upgrade Zap at Living Wall. Sure, Zap is like usually your upgrade for the starter deck, whatever. It's like, I could have upgraded Self-Repair, I guess, probably fine. Static Discharge early is damage. Take it over Loop because it's damage and Loop doesn't really do much damage here. Take an early Barrage. I think we've talked about Barrage quite a lot. Upgrading Static Discharge. Managed to kill Gremlin Knob, only taking 9, which is excellent. Also, presumably, I healed 7, so I actually only took 2. That's really good for a Defect run, actually. Upgraded dual cast, Eternal Feathers, some good sustain, grab a turbo because we're playing a Runic Pyramid deck. Runic Pyramid decks love having access to extra energy. Wing Boots, but no extra elites in the end of the act, it looks like. We got Like a Villain Dead, got a Chill, which is just a really nice zero cost block generating card. Got a Reinforced Body, which is excellent with Recycle, mentioned this earlier. I actually took a Storm. And I guess I upgrade it soon after. That's interesting, because I don't have that many powers at this point. I have the Static Discharge and the Self-Repair. I guess the deck is lacking in damage though, and Storm is actually a really nice way to accelerate your progress toward your late game synergies. It's a nice way to deal damage in mid game with cards which are good for late game. Your powers are going to be good for late game, and making them channel lightning orbs is a good way to like kill the act 2. Immediately upgraded it so that I could put it in my starting hand, and got an Electrodynamics from Slime Boss, so we are like spooled up. We are ready to beat next act with this Runic Pyramid and everything, and honestly we're gonna draw the rest of the elephant here. Just sort of skip the rest. Got a Meat on the Bone, which probably happens sometimes, but not all the time. Get through this act pretty comfortably. Seek Plus at the end, sure. Philo Stone as well, which is fine. Got our Recycle there, Pantograph, Data Disc. Data Disc, very, very powerful relic, nice to have focus. Got a Biased Cognition, somewhat late in the run, but, you know, that's good enough. I already had the Capacitor, or not the Capacitor, sorry, the Consume for focus. I also have a Capacitor to go with it. And yeah, 41 damage actually against Shield and Spear. Sometimes turn 2 sucks in this fight. If you don't have like Apparitions or Genetic Algorithms or an Incense Burner or something like that, that can happen, unfortunately. But I do have Pantograph and just 9 damage against the Heart. Generally, a deck that is this powerful is going to die from turn 2 or 3 in these fights, if it's going to die at all. If it survives those turns, it's generally going to be just fine. Yeah, this is, I think, the strongest deck of the decks that we've looked at so far, just because of the Runic Pyramid start, making it incredibly, incredibly reliable. Managed to get rid of all of the strikes and one of the defends as well. Defect does not like strikes or defends very much, but on the other hand, Defect has so much card draw and so much strength in the late game cards that get added. You don't really need to go crazy about removing all of those strikes and defends. You can get by with just removing like 3 of the strikes or whatever. I feel like Watcher benefits more than Defect from really removing all of the basics if possible. Alright, this is an Astrolabe start, which is one of the premium boss relic swaps for sure. Not sure what I got off it, but this is probably just a really, really, really easy run, honestly. Early Defragment, early Buffer, very early Toxic Egg as well. Chaos Plus is a fun card. Unupgraded Chaos is pretty mediocre, but the upgraded Chaos that gives you 2 orbs is legitimately good. Hitting Plasma on this is usually great. Hitting Frost with it is completely fine. Hitting Dark Orbs with it is great. And the Lightning Orbs are usually the weakest of the 4, but I mean, if you have a card that channels 2 Lightning Orbs for 1 energy, that's still not a very bad card. And usually all of the other modes that it can have are upside over that. Purchased a Capacitor and a Seek Plus. Yep, that's exactly what I want. So you've got the Seek Plus to accelerate you, you've got the Capacitor to actually deploy all of the stuff that you want. And grabbed the Fission Plus from the Guardian to continue trying to accelerate everything really fast. Got a second Capacitor on floor 17 too. I don't know if I have any focus yet. I guess I got a Defragment there, so yes, I do. This is like very close to already won. Just checking out the snowball here. It looks like we are snowballing. We're taking 0 damage in all of these fights. Like, we don't really even have sustain, I don't think. We're just not taking damage. 0 damage. Took 10 damage from Sensory Stone, which is voluntary. And then healed for 7 against the double Orb Walker event. Gosh, this is just an ugly, ugly stomp. There's a third capacitor, plus a consume plus, so this is going pretty heavily into being able to really, really scale your orbs. I took gold from Mind Bloom here, which is fine because there are 2 stores later. I actually have a membership card as well, so they're going to be very big stores. Toolbox is a very good relic. A lot of people are still sleeping on Toolbox, but it is... like, it's almost comparable power level to Bag of Prep. Maybe not quite that strong, but pretty close. It gives you a card in hand, and the cards that you get are often able to like tutor for the most important card in your deck, or upgrade all of your deck, or scale you in some way. Or at least like draw another card while giving you a bit of block or attack or something for the turn. They're just like, you get to choose between 1 of 3 colorless cards too. It's just quite good. Quite good. Generally, if I see Toolbox in a store and have enough money to buy it, I'm quite likely to buy it. Well, this run got orange pellets too, that seems unfair. And a runic capacitor. Alright. 0 damage to Onudeka, 0 damage Time Eater. Upgraded to defend at the campfire. LOL. 5 damage shield and sphere, they got me. And 16 damage from the corrupt heart. And that's the win. Yeah, this is just a very, very, very powerful defect deck. I actually took a tiny house at the end of Act 1, I didn't even notice that. But the deck is nuts. The reason that this deck got nuts so fast is the Toxic Egg allowing it to draw cards so quickly with like the Fission Plus and the Seek Plus, right? The Chill Plus also gives us a lot of block on turn 1. And then the Astrolabe gives you upgraded cards at the start of Act 1, which is very strong. That's way above the power curve for your deck. It also removes 3 of your basic cards for the entire run, and having 3 fewer basic cards is such a big deal. It's so incredibly noticeable to have your hand full of cards that are strong and do useful things and synergize with each other, instead of cards which like deal 6 damage for 1 energy. Those cards are just not as good. This is the first run that we have had with an Amplify in it. This is exciting. Take a look at how this one happened. I did not boss relic swap this time. I guess looking at the act, I wanted this elite path, and maybe there was a good whale bonus I could take instead. Started with Defragment, Compile Driver, Doom and Gloom. This is like the absolute dream, pretty much. Cool-headed. God, this is the absolute dream. I already have a draw 3 Compile Driver plus Doom and Gloom for good AoE damage. Doom and Gloom's really good damage. I remember like a year and a half ago, it was like, when I was talking about Doom and Gloom, I was like, well, it's sort of a clunky card. It does a few different things, and they're all pretty good, but it doesn't do them that well. Like 10 damage for 2 energy just isn't that great a price. But it's usually probably okay because it also channels a Dark Orb. It procs Necronomicon, it lets you sink energy into damage, which is something Defect sort of struggles with, so it's probably okay. I remember like, I used to feel like I had to explain how this card that looked sort of weak was adding up to be actually okay. Was sort of how I felt with analyzing and presenting Doom and Gloom to my audience. And now I'm more like, just like, yeah, that's premium damage. And honestly, I'm like a little bit embarrassed that I ever didn't feel that way, so this card's just incredibly good. It's a way that it lines up with fights. Like, there are so many fights where you have to kill the little nerds and then kill the big nerd, and this does both of those. Sorry, I called Gremlin Leader a nerd there. Mean of me. Alright, upgrading Defragment. I spent 58 gold to avoid losing health at the World of Goop because I am about to walk into some elite fights, and then beat up a gremlin knob, took 4 damage, grabbed a pocket watch. Oh yeah, this is a good relic. And beat up Lagavulin, taking 0 damage, and grabbed an Electrodynamics. This is just the absolute dream. Any guesses on how much damage Tori prevented after getting picked up in Act 1 this time? I'm going to guess 12. 26! Personal record. Alright, Sorry to any Tori fans in the audience. That's probably not actually its personal record. Pretty early Calipers. Calipers is particularly exciting with genetic algorithm, which we did not get in either of these Calipers runs, unfortunately. But you can do some really silly stuff with like Echo Form and an upgraded genetic algorithm plus Calipers. You can just like play your genetic algorithm and basically be intangible for 3 turns once you get to late game. Got a bias cognition from Hexaghost. This is just like a who's who of premium defect cards as we go through the start of this run. Also very good relics. Pocket Watch, insanely good. Okay, the other ones maybe aren't that great. So we're probably going to take a little bit of damage because our other relics aren't so incredible. Definitely a little bit of damage there. Taking the loop, continuing to scale our orbs. Ah, we were clever. We got ourselves below 32 HP so I could feel better about taking Council of Ghosts. Clever. Pick up the Toxic Egg immediately after Council of Ghosts. Very happy to grab a Capacitor as well. This is the Slavers fight, which we won in 3 turns, taking 0 damage. Easy. Bottled Tornado. I'm guessing it's biased cognition here. Unless it hits Defragment. I don't know. That's actually a tough one. I'm not sure what that hits. Anchor. Does it say? No. Upgrading Loop. Another Cool-Headed. Or maybe that's our first one. Second, right? Yeah. Cool-Headed. This deck is just... I feel like the thing that you see in this run is the entire run... At least to me, it feels like it is very linearly building a late game powerhouse deck, and it is walking through Act 1 and 2 without being challenged while it does so. Like, the cards that it is taking along the way are just good enough cards that it can easily do this. And I think that's the key realization to have with Defect. Defect is able to build a late game deck from the beginning of Act 1. And Defect has some support cards for that strategy which are so strong, you can often very easily get through Act 1 and 2 despite the fact that you're doing that. Alright, so yeah, that's going on. Skip this, take a heat sinks. We're not gonna take damage again this run, right? It's just like not really worth talking about anymore. Ooh, took 7 from Awakened one, down below half HP. I think the big thing here that sort of made it a little bit close at the end is I did not... Nah, I take it back. I have no idea why this was close, while the other ones weren't. I guess I'm a little bit light on Frost Orbs, aren't I? 5 Cool-Headeds, but you don't always draw those, and there's no Glacier here. That's probably a lot of it, if I had to guess. A sneeze, just give me a sec. I managed to have a regret in my deck at the end of the run. Maybe the regret was what was dealing me all of the damage. Amplify is an interesting card. I wonder if I had Amplify from Astrolabe. I don't remember seeing myself picking it up here. Oh no, there it is. Amplify is... like... Amplify is always tricky. If you have a deck that's able to draw Amplify and the good powers at the same time reliably, then yeah, Amplify is great. And we've got Pocket Watch, so we're somewhat better at that than a lot of other decks would be, but we're not incredibly good at it. Also eventually took a creative AI in this run. Doesn't really look like a deck that needed that, but on the other hand, it looks like a deck that could afford to do that, so why not? It'd be interesting to see if this deck won without creative AI. I imagine that it would have. What did I get from the Orrery? Doesn't even tell me. I'm not sure. Don't know. Alright. This is another Runic Pyramid relic swap, so we can expect this to be a very, very, very strong run. Amplify particularly good with Runic Pyramid. Bias Cog, double defrag, capacitor loop by the end of the run, so that should be enough to beat most things. This is the first Meteor Strike that we've seen. Meteor Strike, very powerful with Runic Pyramid because you can very easily put it together with any sort of energy generation. Ball Lightning Loop, remove Strike, defragment. Ball Lightning Loop, defragment. Gosh, we already won. Buy another defragment at the store. I bought a turbo early as well, because of course we have the Runic Pyramid, so we're happy to grab an energy card. It's not just that we have less energy because one of our boss relics is Runic Pyramid, it's also that we can guarantee that turbo creates us energy on a turn where we have something good to spend it on. One of the big problems with taking cards which do nothing other than gain energy for you is if you can't guarantee that you draw them at the same time as cards that are worth spending energy on. That's become less of an issue as a lot of the cards have been buffed, and also is not much of an issue at all if you have a Runic Pyramid. If you have a lot of card draw, it also becomes much less of an issue. Cold Snap is excellent, especially alongside these double defragments. This run is so strong. Run is just so incredibly strong. Early Symbiotic Virus, and then an early Incense Burner too. This is where we take the Amplify. Yeah, this is really, really good. Bias Cognition from the boss fight is one of the best picks. Ended up taking Sacred Bark. So I've had like Astrolabe into Tiny House and Runic Pyramid into Sacred Bark. Sort of interesting. Sacred Bark ain't bad, it's just... maybe could have used something even better. Interesting that I'm taking Leap Plus over Steam Barrier in my Runic Pyramid deck. I guess I was not having too much trouble playing all of my cards, but just wanted more block somehow. Self-Repair is nice. Self-Repair better than usual with Runic Pyramid because it's a way to put energy into staying healthier on turns where you're not being attacked. Sometimes you want to stay healthier, but they're not attacking you, so you can't really benefit from like playing your Glacier or whatever, but you can benefit from playing your Self-Repair. Got a Compile Driver and a Steam Barrier, got a Charge Battery Plus, so we're adding a good amount of block cards here. Taking quite a lot of damage actually, except for this Taskmaster fight where I took 2 somehow. Grabbing the Anchor is such a big deal here. Defect loves Anchor so much. Anchor is such a big deal for Defect that I almost think about Defect runs with Anchor and Defect runs without Anchor in different regions of my brain. Because the amount more that I have to think about how I'm going to survive when I don't have Anchor is tremendous amounts higher. Anchor just does a lot for you. Defect's not that good at blocking on turn 1. And gives you 10 block on turn 1. Just sweet. Heatsinks Reboot instead of Double Strike. It seems like an improvement. Taking Fusion here is okay. Probably. We're taking Sunder for that matter. Sunder is pretty good with Runic Pyramid. A little bit surprised that I skipped there, but I guess maybe I was feeling the deck just was doing really well. Another Runic Capacitor. Excellent, excellent stuff. Just, this seems like, oh my god, Jorbs, you keep on getting these broken shop relics with Defect, you're so lucky. I want to reiterate, because I said earlier, I'm like very deliberately going to more shops than I would with other characters with enough money to buy shop-only relics on Defect because of how strong these relics are. So if you're looking at this and feeling like you never get Runic Capacitor this often or whatever, well, one, it is a world record streak, so I did get above average luck, sure. But also, two, I'm very deliberately trying to get this many Runic Capacitors. If you tried to get more of them, you would get more of them too. You get a tiny chest, yay! And an echo form. I don't think I've had a ton of echo forms in this world record streak either. Upgrade bias cog, take 5. I would take the Meteor Strike from Collector. Meteor Strike's very strong, and with a turbo already, even though we're on 3 energy, this card is enough to really make our deck start going. Got a Coffee Dripper, which should be fine. 0 damage, full health, full health, full health, full health, full health. Vision, really, really, really big pickup from the shapes. Full health, full health, basically full health, full health, full health, 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 full. Awakened one dealt us some damage. Dealt us some damage. Yeah, when you're building your deck in this way, like Act 3 fights aren't even really more challenging than Act 2 fights, it feels like. Like Act 2 fights tend to attack you from more faster, and if you have a deck that like starts off slow and then you're pretty happy for a fight to give you a turn or two before it starts hitting you hard. Just seek and loop. Sure, why not? Full health. And wow, Corrupt Heart dealt us 78 here. So looking at this deck, it is a lot of cards. It doesn't have a ton of block, and it's got like a bit of scaling, but not a tremendous amount. It also doesn't have that many Frost Orbs. So it's easy to imagine that the heart could deal lots of damage to us. I think I actually remember this run in Echo form was just the absolute bottom card of my deck. So I think that was largely what happened. I think I like specifically remember like Echo form Amplify being at the absolute bottom of the deck. Also note that this is a run where I didn't manage to find an artifact charge for Biased Cog, which didn't actually stop me from winning in any way. It wasn't a concern in the slightest for the entirety of Act 3 and was maybe a little bit awkward for the hard fight, but not by that much. Just not really necessary to have the artifact charge for Bias Cognition. It still gives you tons and tons and tons of focus. This is another Runic Pyramid boss swap. So I've got Runic Pyramid, Astrolabe, no swap, Runic Pyramid, Runic Pyramid. That's very lucky. That's very above average for sure. Although I've been winning the no relic swap ones as well, so. This is a run where I take floor 1 Capacitor, which I stand by. I think that that's just correct. If I was offered like a Ball Lightning over it, I'd take the Ball Lightning, but compared to Cool Headed and Hologram, these cards are just not super great. Upgrading Zap, sure, we get the Cold Snap going. We buy a Ball Lightning, so again, we've just like got 2 premium common attacks plus an Orb Scaling card already at the end of floor 5. This feels like a pretty standard way for Defect runs to start. Grab a Molten Egg and a Core Surge here on floor 6. Now, Core Surge obviously has this mode where it gives you an artifact charge, and that plays very nicely with Biased Cog if we happen to get it later in the run. Also, like, blocks Frail or Vulnerable or other things like that in all sorts of situations. Blocks the Dexterity down from a Speed Potion, maybe. Core Surge Plus also has this other thing going on where it deals 15 damage, which is actually a lot of damage. Often when someone like asks me why I don't like Panacea more, when they see me take Core Surge all the time, like, well, Panacea doesn't deal 15 damage. That's a large part of it. This is enough to almost kill a dagger in the Reptimancer fight. This is a card that's capable of turning in the Act 4 Elite fight. This is a card that can very, very much matter in terms of your damage against Slavers in Act 2, or against the Act 1 boss fight, or against Gremlin Mob. So that is an attack. It does deal damage. One thing to keep in mind. Grabbing a boot sequence with Pyramid, of course. Creating Ball Lightning, sure. Get a Mummified Hand, so our energy is much less of a concern with Pyramid now. Get a Barrage, which is a little bit better than usual with Pyramid, because if we draw it before we have Orbs channeled, we can wait to use it. Eternal Feathers, nice sustain. Another Cold Snap. I sort of like Stone Calendar, actually. I used to just think Stone Calendar was a giant meme. I mean, it dealt 1.5 damage per turn, so it's not like it was incredible. I feel like Stone Calendar actually matters a lot in some particularly difficult fights, though. Like Slime Boss in particular, Stone Calendar is really good in. Not sure how much trouble Defect has against Slime Boss in particular. We also got a Fission from this Gremlin Up fight, which is perhaps more of a big deal. Card's very good. And we kill Slime Boss, we get Rainbow, which is probably the worst of the boss rares that we've gotten so far. Worth noting that, like, yeah, I have a Runic Pyramid, and maybe I could do some really cool stuff with zero-cost cards with this all-for-one, but I'm so far away from that happening. And this is maybe one of the biggest reasons that you're just not seeing this happen in these runs. If you're able to put together some really cool zero-cost synergies with your all-for-one, you are doing okay. It's alright. Definitely strong enough to win a lot of runs of Slay the Spire. But I just spent Act 1 getting like halfway to my late-game orb scaling already. Instead of taking Go for the Eyes, you know? So I don't have those zero-cost cards waiting to go for all-for-one. I've already gotten 2 cards away from solving the endgame fights instead. So we take Rainbow pretty happily. We have a Fission, so channeling more orbs for Fission is very powerful. And we get a Pandora's Box, which gives us Null, unfortunately. Unfortunately, still can't see what Pandora's Box gives us, but you can see what the ending deck looks like. I think I might have gotten a genetic algorithm, or maybe even 2 genetic algorithms from it. Well, I definitely got a genetic algorithm there, so I guess that's not true. Just vibing through Act 2 here, not taking too much damage or anything. Beating up the champ, taking Cursed Key, just the same general vibes as all of these other runs. Act 3 is very easy. Grabbing the extra scaling stuff when we can. Upgrading it when we can, and very easily beating the Spear and Shield in the Heart. This deck was particularly strong because of the Fissions, plus its ability to channel a lot of orbs. Just very, very, very rapidly accelerates us into setting everything that we have up. The deck's not actually that good at creating orbs. No defragments, no biased cog or anything. It has 2 copies of Consume Plus, but only 1 Capacitor Plus. So part of this is the strength of Runic Pyramid, allowing us to pair Amplify and Capacitor Plus together, which gives us plenty of orbs to scale. There are quite a lot of ways to put together enough orb stuff to just win your late game fight. And yeah, Amplify, Capacitor, plus Consume is going to do it for you. We've also got the Loot Plus, of course. But yeah, with Runic Pyramid and Fissions, we're able to get to those cards, even though it's not the most premium late game scaling defect setup, and put it all together. Alright, we got a Cursed Key relic swap. I tend not to think that 4 energy relic swaps are incredible in Defect. They're not really the ones that I'm looking for when I relic swap, but they tend to be okay. We've got Meteor Strike as an option that's a lot more accessible when you start on 4 energy. Cards like Compile Driver and Cool Headed go up in value. Yeah. You get to play a slightly different run. Cards like Equilibrium and Glacier get better. Doom and Gloom gets even better than usual. Stuff like that. Defect's pretty good at spending extra energy when you have it. Defect doesn't need to spend extra energy to win, but you know, if you have extra energy, you can find pretty good ways to use it usually. 4-1 Ball Lightning, always incredibly happy to grab one of those. Floor 3 Capacitor, here we go. The Compile Driver in floor 5, so already we have that card draw common to help us spend our 4 energy. Barrage pretty early, Overconsume. Not sure I would make that choice today, for what it's worth. And we kill Gremlin very easily and get an Echo Form, so one thing that's nice about 4 energy is it's easier to take Echo Form very early on in the run. Glacier is great. Skipping Recycle, which I think is fine. We do have Unceasing Top, but Unceasing Top Recycle is sort of a pipe dream, just doesn't really happen very often. Especially when, like, the first time through your deck you win the run, because your cards are so strong. It's hard to care very much about, like, infinite that you might achieve when your 10th time through the deck in a fight. It just seems sort of, yeah, not really worth building towards. You got a Seek from the Slime Boss and an Astrolabe. Still doesn't show us what it gives, unfortunately. Probably none of these runs will show us what we transform into. This is the first of the streaks, right? If I remember right. Purchased a membership card and a Toxic Egg, which is very exciting. I love Toxic Egg Defect, because Toxic Egg draws a lot of cards for Defect. You get your Skims upgraded, you get your Holograms upgraded. And Defect gets to do a lot of really cool things with extra cards drawn. So we have a Turbo Plus here already, for example. I got 2 stores in a row there. Whoops. Got a Focus Potion. I wonder if I still have my Potion of Capacity from Act 1. Possible, you know. Probably not anymore, because I probably have 2 Focus Potions now, since I already have a Capacitor. Bullheaded Plus is great. Happy Flower, Hologram Plus, Smoke Bomb, and Orange Pellets from the store. So here we go, going to a merchant with enough gold to buy the shop-only relic again. I actually purchased Smoke Bomb from this merchant because I took 24 from the Chosen Flock. I'm just like on 10 health. This is the closest I've gotten to bottoming out in Act 2 so far. Largely just on the back of having pretty unlucky hallway fights. And so, you know, I just take the Smoke Bomb if I need it. We can bail out. Turns out that I very easily win this fight, and then... Oh, that's neat. I actually chose to upgrade Capacitor at the rest site. Where did my 12 health come from? Oh, Eternal Feather, sure. So the Smoke Bomb lets me get pretty greedy here. Take 8 damage from Centurion and Mystic and grab an Equilibrium Plus. This card is... Both halves of this card are quite good, basically. Yeah. Retaining your hand is a very powerful effect. Gaining 16 block is very worthwhile. Decided to upgrade again at this campfire, and then we beat the champ taking 0 damage. Actually took Electrodynamics here, so I guess I'm not feeling very comfortable in my deck's ability to beat Reptimancer, which, looking at the deck, is believable to me. It doesn't look like a deck that's that great at beating Reptimancer yet. But yeah, that's going to be one of those close decisions. It was made probably a little bit easier here by the fact that there just isn't another great card. I don't have many reasons to care that much about a second Rainbow here. I think I have 1 Compile Driver, and that's pretty much it in terms of things that really care about Rainbow. And Thunderstrike is just generally an unplayable card. It's very rare that you want a Thunderstrike in your deck. And we got a Snecko Eye. So Snecko Eye Defect's a little bit strange, because Defect is all about drawing and playing 1-cost powers, basically. You want to be able to draw and play them the first time that you get them. But I guess this was a situation where I want to draw Echo Form faster and put it in play, and honestly, that's almost enough to justify Snecko Eye on its own. Like, straight up. The Relic isn't that good in this deck other than for the fact that it lets us draw Echo Form faster and lets us put it in play for less energy cost. And Echo Form's just that strong. You can dedicate a lot of resources to trying to get Echo Form into play. It's also an orange pellet Snecko Eye, so that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. 0 damage, basically 0 damage. Basically 0 damage, full health, full health, full health, full health. Damaged full health, Jawworm Horde. That does some good damage though. Buying a billion things at the store. And the boss fight, Awakened One hit us pretty well, but you know, we're okay. Awakened One fight tends to deal you damage on like turn 2, 3, and 4. It's weird because Defect often plays a lot of powers, and Awakened One ostensibly is meant to get stronger as you play powers, but Defect's powers are so much more relevant in what they do for Defect than they are in like the 2 strength that they give to Awakened One. The strength that they're giving Awakened One just isn't that big a deal. So you more tend to take damage in the Awakened One fight because you can't kill the bird cultists very well, because you just haven't front-loaded your deck with that much damage. You probably needed to kill Reptimancer, but you maybe had potions for that, and also the daggers have significantly less health than the bird cultists do. So, that's all fine. Upgrade defrag, some damage against shield and spear, and actually took 66 damage against the heart, which was not enough to kill us because we had a lizard tail. But the heart came close this time. This is another deck that does not set up into anything that's that incredible. If you look at what we have, it's like 2 capacitors into defrag. Yep. This deck just doesn't have that much stuff that it's setting up into. But with the Echo Form, it turns out that that's enough, and probably I had 1 or 2 focus potions left over from earlier in the run as well to help out with the heart fight. Cool, good run. Let me just check. Okay, we're almost done. Been going for 2 hours. All right, so that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've actually, at this point in my career as a Slay the Spire player, this is the 3rd time that I have had 9 wins in a row as Defect. So this is not like the first time that I've been here. Yeah, like I've been saying, almost certain that Blur got 10. So, you know, sort of excited to equal that, but I'm also very happy to just have hit 9 with Defect again. I enjoy playing the character a lot. Feels like I'm good at the character and like I get rewarded for being good at the character, and it still has a lot of interesting decisions for me where like deciding whether I want electrodynamics or not is interesting, deciding between a variety of good commons is interesting, deciding when I want another block card is interesting, deciding how aggressively to path through Act 2 is interesting. I just have a ton of fun trying to problem solve on Defect, and it feels not quite the same as playing the other characters, which I like. I also sort of like that I don't die very much at the end of runs as Defect, because dying at the end of runs just isn't fun. I don't like it very much. If I'm going to dedicate 2 hours to a run, I don't want to lose it. I'm gonna die in Act 1 in 15 minutes, that's fine by me. That is my preferred death in Slay the Spire. But playing like a silent run where you have a deck that's perfectly good at all of the hallway fights and elite fights in the game and just really sucks at beating Time Eater in the heart, that is not very much fun. Especially when like you only have like 4 or 5 different things you can easily hit that will fix your problems against Time Eater in the heart. And that happens sometimes with Silent, and very rarely does it feel like that's happening to you when you play Defect, in my experience. Even if you're not finding any focus or frost orbs or whatever, you're still very commonly able to come up with some creative solution. You know, one thing that's actually missing from this entire win streak is like any creative problem solving as Defect. These are all just cookie cutter defragment capacitor Defect decks, which is too bad. I had another 9 streak in January. Maybe we could look at that real quick after this and see if there are any creative decks in terms of solving stuff. I'd have to find it, of course. Not sure I could even find it. I'm good look for it. Okay, so yeah, Ball Lightning, Capacitor. Are you serious? I'm so good at this game. That's the same run as last time. Okay, Boot Sequence, Rip and Tear. So we take a, pretty good block card. Defect's okay with having a block card added to the deck early. Rip and Tear's good-ish damage. Cool-headed over All for One. I think if I didn't have Choker as my boss relic swap, I'm sure that a lot of people would have thought that All for One was a good pickup here on floor 4. I think All for One is like almost worse than Streamline here. I just don't think that card is good, and don't think you should be doing that to yourself, like ever. Early Genetic Algorithm. I think for the first time in this streak, early Genetic Algorithm, card's very, very good. Over Sweeping Beam and Cold Snap, which are both decent cards as well. Got a Thread and Needle from Gremlin Knob, which is an excellent, excellent relic. And a Cold Snap, which is an excellent card early. Upgrade our Rip and Tear, keep dealing damage. Got an Art of War from Centuries, which is a relic that does pretty well in Defect a lot of the time. Defect's very capable of winning without playing attacks like ever. In this situation, I do have the Cold Snap and the Rip and Tear, but that's like pretty normal. You know, you need some damage early on in the run. I don't necessarily have to keep playing those cards as we get later on. There are going to be lots of fights where they're not very important to play at all. So we rest, we get another Ball Lightning and a Static Discharge, so loading up on damage, preparing for Act 2, that's all fine. The Vulin goes down pretty easily, getting some max HP from the Singing Ball we picked up. Take a buffer from our boss fight reward, which is definitely not the most powerful boss fight reward that we've gotten, but whatever. And I actually took Inserter from the boss treasure chest. So, do I already have it consumed? I think my options were not great there. Inserter is easy to misevaluate. Inserter looks like it's just like the bee's knees. God, you just get infinite orb slots, you might think. Well, no, 1 orb slots are capped at 10, so if you have like 2 capacitors, you're already pretty much capping your orb slots. 2, this only gives you an orb slot every 2 turns. It's like the heart fight lasts like 12 turns. It gives you 6 orb slots, but you don't get them straight away. This is okay. I usually think of Inserter as sort of comparable to taking a relic that gives me a card draw and an energy once. Which is, not that great, but it's okay. And also adding a capacitor to my deck as well. That's like vaguely how I evaluate its power level. So like a mediocre relic plus a capacitor reward. We'll say a mediocre to good relic plus a capacitor reward. Anyway, it's okay. It can definitely be stronger in some situations, and here we've got like the Art of War and some pretty decent block cards with genetic algorithms, so maybe I'm thinking I can stall for a long time. Probably I'm also just not having any other good options in that boss reward screen. Warped Tongs, always happy to get Warped Tongs. Actually skipped the Buffer here. So, Buffer is a pretty decent card. There are some fights where it doesn't do great, but in general it's pretty good. I think the reason that you skip Buffer is you feel like your deck has a strong defensive slant already, so you don't really need more cards in that direction, and you want to make sure that you don't just randomly die to Awakened One. Loading your deck down with tons of powers leads to Awakened One deaths, which is not a great time. You want your powers to be powers that are good, that give you good output. Defect has no shortage whatsoever of really good scaling powers. Defragments and capacitors and loops and echo forms, and probably other things that I didn't mention. And so you really don't have to be taking mediocre Defect scaling powers. Like, you're going to get offered good ones most of the time. Almost all of the time. If you're me, just every time. Just get offered all of them every time. Easy. Actually don't have a capacitor this run, huh? Anyway, okay, so duplication potions, great. That's the sort of potion that you can hold on to until the end of the run for the heart fight. We are healing as we go through Act 2 here for the most part. Bronze Automaton, pretty easy. Get our Echo form, get another duplication potion. And I took Tiny House from this boss reward, so we're not having the strongest boss relics, but the Choker with 4 energy is enough to just win. And looking through this act, I'm going to say pretty confidently that we just don't ever come even close to dying. Raptormancer dealt us 54. Trying. She tried. And didn't succeed. And the act on almost full health. This has been incredibly, incredibly normal, right? This way of building a Defect deck just wins once you reach Act 3. Basically what I'm showing. And not much trouble at all in Act 4. So, how does this style of building a Defect deck fail? You can die in Act 1 if you're not taking damage cards sensibly enough and maybe not taking a good block card. You can die in Act 2. Often I find that my deaths in Act 2 are actually more about the hallway fights beating me up than the elite fights. If you get unlucky hallway fights, that's where the big variance in how much damage you take comes from, I feel like. Like, usually you take a somewhat reasonably predictable amount of damage from an elite fight in Act 2. With Defect in particular, Book of Stabbing and Slavers feel like they deal comparable amounts of damage a lot of the time, and Gremlin Leader probably gets like 1 attack off, so probably deals a comparable amount of damage as well. But the hallway fights for Defect really feel like you can take 0 damage or you can take 20. Pretty easily. So getting unlucky in Act 2 is definitely one way that you can die. And then really, really heavily not finding any scaling whatsoever for the late game is a way that you can die, although I think looking at these runs, it's easy to see that there are a lot of ways that I can find scaling, and I don't really need that much scaling, and also like all of Act 3 is incredibly easy, so I can hold scaling potions for myself pretty easy. Like, it's not that bad, and the few times that you really don't find anything, you get to like sort of go off the rails and try to make things work with stacks and stuff like that, and that can actually happen. Ended up eventually dying to Gremlin Leader despite having an Electrodynamics. That's a pretty feel-bad moment. But here's our Act 2 where finally things didn't quite managed to turn the corner for us. Took 37 damage from birds with a Phylostone at the start of this Act 2, so I have identified the problem. Then I transformed into electrodynamics and upgrade strikes and defense. Feels sort of bad that I lost from here. With a regal pillow as well, so I like basically had full health. But then like bad hallway fight, bad hallway fight, bad hallway fight, and unlucky gremlin leader. And we're dead. I think I remember this gremlin leader fight. I left one of the gremlins alive, which lets gremlin leader attack you 50% of the time, and if you kill 2 of them, gremlin leader only attacks you I think 30% of the time. And then I got attacked by gremlin leader and died, so too bad. Maybe even a misplay. Maybe if I had gotten rid of both of the gremlins, I wouldn't have been attacked, and I would still be winning with Defect to this day. I'd be on a 150 run streak. Probably not, because I bet I lost the next run too. I mean, after you've won like 10 in a row, you know, you can start having some fun. Unfortunately, Gremlin Nub was there to beat me up. Alright, let's see if I can find... Just looking at this, it should be pretty obvious. That looks like 9 in a row. But this is mostly just focus. This is mostly just focus plus a meteor strike. This is entirely focus. This is a little bit more tricky, but it's mostly just focus. Capacitor consumed, biased god, core surge. Third face turn. Did not get a lot of bird face turns in the 10-0 streak, by the way. Bird face turn is like one of the strongest defect relics, I think. Very, very, very powerful to be able to sustain through Act 2 with it, and then it just absolutely like solidifies everything for you late game. You don't even have to think about being in danger in Act 3 if you have a bird face turn. You just double consume with capacitor, amplify capacitor. I remember, I think, this deck being pretty tricky because I really wanted to play amplify and capacitor, and it was difficult for me to line that up unless I drew Seek. Although, I think at some point I bottled Seek, and it stopped being a problem. Yeah, pretty sure that I'm remembering that right. This one has double machine learning, which implies that something was going pretty wrong, but ended up being okay. Just focus in the end, pretty much. Wait, is this the one? There's one in here somewhere where I had literally no frost orbs. Maybe that's like the last one. Triple capacitor consume. Consume, defrank, double capacitor. Not a lot of relics this run. Sometimes you don't need a ton of relics though. That's another thing about Defect is if you're weak in Act 2, your general strategy is so strong for Act 3 that you don't have to fight Elite if it's like dangerous. More than the other characters, you can really just like try to skip Act 2 and go to Act 3, and the like average fight in Act 3 is basically the same difficulty as the fights in Act 2 were anyway, and then the boss fights, like, as long as you prepare decently for them, you can win them with a deck that can't beat Reptimancer, honestly. Like, as long as you have potions for the right moment and like set Incense Burner on the right number. Bias cogs and defrags. No, I just like every single one of these runs just wins off focus. I think I talked with Terrence about this because Terrence was talking about Defect, and Terrence has been having success with all sorts of other creative things, which is very fun. Very fun. I'm almost jealous. And we were just like talking about like focus, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I just win every run by taking the focus cards, I guess. And he was like, oh, but what about the runs where you don't get focus because you don't always get focus? And I was like, well, no, I do. Pretty much. And then I like looked at my run history and like, and all of the Defect runs where I'd made it through Act 2, found focus, basically. Like, it's actually pretty hard to miss all of the focus cards. You got focus relics, focus potions, 2 focus uncommons, a very good focus rare. It's like there's just a lot of cards that do that. A lot of things that do that in general. And then we had a conversation about how maybe he needed to be taking consume on floor 1 like I was. But anyway, yeah, this was fun. I hope you enjoyed the look at Defect. I managed to keep it under 2.5 hours, which I'm very proud of. My eyes are getting irritated because that light is shining on them. So I'm gonna stop talking. Defect's rad though, and if you have any questions about Defect, feel free to leave them in the comments of the videos. I do check these comments. If you like the channel and want to see more content like this, press the subscribe button, smash the like button, and then throw your PC out the window so that you never undo that, so that it's permanent. Thanks for hanging out, everybody, and I'll see you next time. I think I'm actually going to be talking about the Watcher win streak that wasn't. The Watcher world record is 18-0, and during this period I had a streak of 19 Watcher games where I won 18 out of the 19, so there was just the one loss that stood between me and the world record there. So I'll probably take a look at that, because for the first time in my career I actually feel very comfortable with how I think is the correct way to play Watcher. And very comfortable that I'm able to like perform at the highest level in the world by playing that way. So I had an 18-1 streak in that. I'm currently on a 9-0 streak with Watcher as I record this video. Just sort of feels like the characters clicked for me. So maybe we'll talk about that. And then I have the rotating win streaks to talk about too. My voice, my poor voice. I've recorded like 7 hours of YouTube videos today in which I just talk nonstop. So I'm gonna go have a cup of tea. Thanks for chilling, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope your day is going well. Spring here. I hope if you are enjoying spring, it is lovely.